geologist and you see a rock like this over here, what things might you do to determine if that is a rock that was just left here by the glacier, or if that is actually part of the natural bedrock that's around here?
The shape you talk about,
You could look at, you could look for signs that the glacier went over it.
And also probably see the rocks around it. Like for example, if you see something similar, it's more probably like originally they're here.
Right. So if it's a rock of a completely different type that you don't see native to this area, you know the glacier carried it. I suppose in another case you could also just dig. If it's loose, it's not attached. But it's worth actually getting kids just thinking about, how might a geologist go about figuring out about the rocks that are around here. Now we're going to keep heading up the path, but already, what are you noticing about some of the rocks? I mean, did we see rocks this size when we were over at Longfellow?
No.
No, it was all small debris. These are much larger rocks. Now, one of the things about New England is, we all try to walk and talk at the same time. We don't have old growth forest here in New England because by the end of the 18th century, most of this land had been cleared by the colonists, either because they needed it for pasture land or they needed it for farmland. They needed the wood for building and for fuel. And so you won't find many old growth trees in New England. All of this is second growth. You'll find really old trees, but you won't find a lot. But the effect of all of that deforestation in this area meant that at first there was lots of rich soil here that had been left by the glacier. But without trees, a lot of that eroded away. So that they were left with, not great soil. And then if you think about how in the wintertime, I used to always laugh as a kid growing up, my dad would go out and fix his garden. And every spring, he would dig up more rocks. I'm like, Dad, didn't you just clean out the garden of rocks last year? And every year he'd end up digging up more rocks. Well, because again, with frost heaves and whatever else, the rocks start working their way up to the surface. You'll notice along the side here, there's a remnant of an old stone wall. As the farmers dug up all these stones, they needed to do something with them. So in a lot of, they used to just dump them at the sides of the fields. And eventually they used them to make boundaries that were either designed to keep their cattle in or as boundary markers. But you'll see stone walls all over New England. But I'd like to point out all those little rocks that are around. Because you see there's lots of these rocks strewn around in this whole area. We're still seeing our rock vents here. But then as you keep heading down this path, you get to this. Yeah. And this is our rock. This is something called a glacial erratic. And erratics are rocks. If you think about erratic behavior, or it's something that doesn't fit in, doesn't belong. So a glacial erratic is a rock that was carried by the glacier and left behind someplace else. Now, I used to be really, be thinking like, rocks can be carried hundreds of miles. This may have come to us from Canada. And I used to have these great thoughts about it. And then a local geologist kind of said to me, maybe not so much, Carolyn. This rock type exactly matches the ledge behind Bates School, which is right over there. So this rock did not travel very far. But as we start to look at this rock, you can start to figure out why it didn't travel very far just by the sheer size of it. I mentioned that, any rock that's been exposed at the surface, and even for a few feet down, is going to be impacted by weather, by temperature changes, by all these different things. So we see this rock here, and what do you notice about the surface of this rock here?
This is not very smooth. It looks like it's a concrete.
Yeah, doesn't it? It looks like you've got all these little jaggy things in here. So it's kind of flattish, but it's really rough. But now we're going to look at the same exact rock down here. This is granite. This rock is granite, absolutely. And these pink bits are feldspar, which is one of the minerals that is inside granite. So here, we've got, the rock looks very, very different. And you don't have, it's a little rough here, but if you see these areas, this flat area here doesn't look anything like the flat area up there. What might have made it so that the rock up there looks so different than the rock surface down here?
Maybe there's two rocks. They just happen to. They just meet each other.
I like that idea, but I'm going to actually say no. This is all the same rock type. Let me ask you this: if it really started to rain right now, would you rather be standing up there or would you rather be standing here?
Oh, you mean the
Like if it started raining on us right now, where would you feel more protected?
the magnetic
From the
field
elements, just from wind, rain, whatever else. Up there or down here?
here. Here.
Yeah. Up there,
see.
the rock is much more exposed to the sun, to sunlight and UV the UV rays. It's exposed to the wind, is exposed to the rain. So the rock up there is weathering differently than it's weathering here. Does that make sense?
But you think
Speaking
if
of
it's
rain.
on top, it's gonna be like there?
Yeah, I'm not sure. This is not a rock we climb up on top of.
Right, but the top should have the same weathering.
Probably. I mean, just because of the exposure to the elements. So, I mean, you can start to see how even an individual rock is going to weather differently. And up there, those little knobby things we see are most likely these pink. The rock around these pink ones is like, it just is weathering away faster because different minerals will even weather away at different rates. That if you notice when we were over at Devil's Slide, there was pink granite all around, and then we had that big black rock, which was Devil's Slide. That's the same kind of black rock that's here. There's a giant intrusion inside all the granite. But here you can see where pieces, this was probably all one part of the rock, but this stuff has now broken off. And you can even see here with this crack in here, eventually this piece is probably going to break out.
Because they're different minerals.
Yeah, exactly.
They expand differently.
Exactly.
So they tend to crack.
Right. And this one even has an intrusion inside the intrusion. Another crack formed in the diorite and other stuff came in. And here, to your point earlier, here we see kind of that more rough surface like we saw on the other side there. And there's more of the lichen on here and the growth. What do you notice in this area?
Like something burned? Like all the trees are...
Oh, the trees are down and dying. Yeah, look at that. And look over to the other side. What do you notice about the land around here?
It's like basin.
Yeah, it's like a basin. There was no water in here. We just had enough rain that there's water in here now. This is actually the remnants of something called a kettle hole. And there's kettle holes all over the New England. Cape Cod has a lot of kettle holes. And basically, how a kettle hole forms is, all right, so we've had this huge sheet of ice over us. And eventually, climate warms enough that the ice ages end and all that ice starts to melt. Of course, you're going to have, if you've ever seen a winter where we've had a lot of snow and then we get really fast warming, I mean, you can have water pouring off the snow. So imagine now when you've got these thousands of feet of ice and it's warming, you could have huge streams flowing off these glaciers. And what could happen is that as the ice is melting, a chunk of ice just kind of breaks off by itself. Again, in the wintertime, if you notice the way the snow melted, you might end up with one like kind of random pile of snow that hasn't melted yet. So it's not going to all melt exactly evenly. A chunk breaks off, but you've got all this water flowing off the glacier, carrying with it all the sand and debris and stuff that was frozen up into the glacier. It gets to that block of ice, can't go through it, so it goes around it, and the whole time it goes around it, it's dropping sediments along the way. And then eventually, maybe it even, the melt water flows over the top of that chunk of ice and buries that chunk of ice. So now it's buried under all this debris. But eventually, that chunk of ice is going to melt. And as it does, the land settles and you've ended up with a kettle hole. So this is actually, geologists believe that this is a kettle hole. And if you look around, you can see the raised land all around it. It doesn't necessarily have any streams running into it. It's just this spot. Walden Pond in Concord is a very large kettle hole. But kettle holes can be big or they can be small. Some kettle holes may only have water in them if we've had a very wet season or a very wet winter. Other kettle holes like Walden Pond may have water in them all year long. You asked about how far the glaciers advanced. Keep in mind, the glaciers are going along and in some ways kind of acting like a bulldozer, although some geologists object to that analogy. But some things are getting pushed aside. You've got the leading edge. All sorts of stuff is getting caught up into it. It advances, and eventually it melts. And all that stuff that's on that leading edge just gets dropped behind. Well, that's what we have actually Cape Cod.
Oh, really?
We can thank Cape Cod to the glaciers because that's exactly what happened. Cape Cod is a glacial formation. Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket are all there because of the debris just left when the glacier melted and left all the stuff behind. Long Island off of New York. So that's kind of the as far as the glaciers advanced, and then it just dropped all that stuff. So this pond, you come here in a couple weeks and there may be no water in it. It's really cool if you come in the spring because it might still have snow down in there, and then you really get the image of this image of like the ice block that's melting and all the debris that's being left around it. There's a kettle hole over by Schofield as well. So there's kettle holes all over the place. So again, another glacial feature that and our landscape our landscape in New England is complete. It's all glacial. We can completely attribute it. The Appalachian Mountains and the White Mountains in New Hampshire were once as tall as the Rocky Mountains, at least, and they would have been that jagged. But the glaciers came over them and smoothed them off, and they're just that much older, so they've been weathered that much more, which is why they're now, the top one's only 6,000 feet as opposed to Colorado, which you've got 15,000 foot mountains. It's just because they're so much older, and they've just been worn away that much more.
I still don't get it. Like, what's the momentum for the glacier to move forward? Like, is that because it's
my understanding is that as the snowpack builds up, the weight and pressure on it causes the bottom part to push out. So it's just that constant pressure of weight pushing the ice, and just that much ice and snow is my understanding. So again, the most important things is, as I've mentioned.
Bold word.
Sorry?
The bolded word in your book.
Yeah, exactly. Just follow the script there, at each place, looking for evidence of weathering, erosion, deposition. If they don't have all the right answers, that's not what's important. What's important is getting them to apply their thinking in a real life setting, getting them out, seeing that we've got these wonderful resources right here within our town, and just generating the enthusiasm for getting out and being in nature and seeing things in the real world, not just in a book.
They will be very excited.
They will be excited. It's fun. It's a fun trip. Any other questions for me?
Yeah, I learned a lot. Yeah.
Oh, I hope so. And the most important thing is just have fun. Have fun. That's more important to me than anything else. So thank you. Thank you both for coming. Thank you.